A very good evening to you. Welcome to this Thursday edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo. On the show tonight, different strokes for different folks, or is the ANC deeply worried about losing its own academics, business people and professionals? That's the question we're asking tonight as the party holds its former president and his deputy to speak to those constituencies. After that, our panel examines the behavior of some wayward ANC members who today held hostage an SABC crew, I should say, as well as confiscated their equipment. This on a day, or rather a day after journalists commemorated apartheid-era brutality towards the media, including the burning of newspapers. That and more coming up in today's episode of The Watchdog, which starts right now. For the very first time in a long time, a former ANC President Thabo Mbeki today addressed an election event of the ANC, where he was really trying to convince the party faithful, who are business people, professionals, as well as academics, to stick with the party. Addressing that gathering, the former president told them the ANC is too big to fail, and if it does fail, it will take the country with.
Because the ANC, with its weight and its size, this is the governing party. If this governing party misbehaves, it has a very negative impact on the country. You remember that in 2008, when we had that big financial crisis, started in the States, and we had these big banks and so on. In the end, the government had to come in to bail them out. They kept saying, the Americans were saying, some of these banks are too big to fail, so they need to be rescued. In a sense, I'm saying today the ANC is too big to fail. Because it fails, the country will collapse, it will fail.
Mbeki telling his audience that the problems that continue to plague the ANC were identified many years ago. In fact, as early as the time when former President Nelson Mandela was still the man at the helm of the African National Congress.
The consciousness of an individual can be influenced by the material conditions one finds himself or herself in. We owe it to ourselves first, the movement and society, to analyze in detail the implications of a liberation movement that has ascended to power and therefore controls huge resources. Being in power is rapidly becoming a source of political bankruptcy, in that members of the ANC fight for deployment either as councillors, MPLs and MPs respectively, as if there is no tomorrow. In the local government elections, infighting was a common factor everywhere. He's talking about 2017, 2016 that is. It is foreign to our movement for comrades to see deployment as a source of material benefit rather than the reason to serve the people. These fights among comrades turn the interests of our people off and push them away from the movement. As you can see, I'm saying that the ANC leadership has recognized this fact for many years.
Well, some of the solutions to those problems that were identified a very long time ago lie in the much talked about renewal that Thabo Mbeki was talking about. And we'll get into that bite in a second. Let's bring in, for now, Professor SABC Ntlejana. Good evening, Prof. Thanks very much for your time. You listened in as the former ANC president was talking to those professionals, business people, and academics. Now, the clip we started by playing is actually something he said right at the end, that the ANC is too big to fail, for if it does, it'll take the country with. Your take?
Well, I mean, that is quite true. The ANC is in charge of many municipalities, and so its reach is quite vast. If it doesn't do the kind of things that it has to do, then. But the problem, with the ANC is that they've had quite a number of these programs. They're quite good at coming up with analysis, suggesting programs, but the challenge is always with the implementation of these programs. And it's quite encouraging to see President Mbeki being part of this campaign. He's obviously feels quite enthused. This is a welcoming ANC for him. And he's vouching for the ANC. But the problem of the ANC is not so much what it says. They always say the right things. And in him, they have quite a capable spokesperson. But it is the machinery of the ANC. It is the political will. It is the quality of leadership. We've been here before. Many things have been said, new mechanisms launching leaders, but only for things to get worse. With every program, we've had bad results. So this is well and good, but the test is in the implementation, yeah?
Well, the good spokesperson of the ANC, he's saying, he is. Interestingly, I mean, he went on, like he quoted, former ANC presidents, well, in particular, former president, the late former president Nelson Mandela, and then went on to quote Secretaries General of the ANC, your Kgalema Motlantes and your Gwede Mandashas. Interestingly, stayed away from talking about himself or putting himself, in the mix, because if you follow the logic, right? If in Mahikeng, former President Nelson Mandela was the first to speak out openly and quite forcefully about the ills that have continued to plague the ANC to this point, he immediately succeeded him. One would have thought that he would then, put himself there as well and perhaps talk about what they tried to do subsequent to these problems actually being identified.
Well, I guess he's being quite modest. There are quite a number of two things specifically that his presidency tried to introduce to speak to the issue of morality and technical expertise that are required in government. In '97, the Mafikeng Conference came up with a policy proposal saying, given that there are different requirements for leadership in the party on the one hand and leadership in government, naturally you needed two sets of skills. In government, you needed technical expertise. So to a point where they even suggested two presidents for the ANC, one for the party and one for government, because they said for government you needed someone with technical expertise to run a modern economy. That was a document, I think the title was Leadership Challenges of the Current Phase, something to that effect. And in December of 2000, the NEC then adopted introduced rather another document through the eye of the needle that speak more to issues of morality. And then these were all the things that were intended to make sure that the ANC had the right kind of leadership. And Mbeki obviously was following Mandela in '97, harped on the problem of corruption, and even introduced the NPA Scorpions that was led by Bulelani Ngcuka. And so these were responses, institutional responses to leadership challenges, and there were some other technical programs that were introduced to provide skills in the public service. Unfortunately, the ANC kicked him out in 2008, especially at the time when you were beginning to turn. One of the key issues actually was to professionalize the public service in the 2000s. He had begun to identify the issue of cadre deployment as a problem for the ANC, and they were talking of one public service, of professionalizing appointments, and then the toxic politics of the ANC took over from 2005, and after that, as you know, it was a downward spiral. So Mbeki was right at the center of modernizing the state. It's just that he was overtaken by the barbarians. Yeah.
But I'm still I mean, modesty aside, I don't know if there's value in modesty in a time of desperation, on the part of the ANC. And secondly, if, as he says in that bite we played right at the beginning, because the ANC is too big, if it fails, it will take the country with. And precisely because I think someone needed to demonstrate if things are as you have just as you have just described them, that over time, attempts were made to actually correct the wrongs and then bring with that an analysis of why, those attempts failed. I think approaching it that way, I could be wrong for what it's worth, I think that approach, would have actually, done more justice to what he was trying to do, put things into perspective, demonstrate that attempts were made, and then begin to say why he thinks, which we're going to get into right now, why he thinks things are going to change this time around.
Well, you'll have to ask him for your but my sense is that it doesn't. He's been brought in there as a nice, elderly, friendly, intellectual old man. He's trying to be nice. Yes, he is being frank, but I guess he's trying to avoid accusing his successors, especially Jacob Zuma. But I mean, quite frankly, part of the big problem here was that, even the Treasury, your Treasury, amongst its regulations, is that if you see that this municipality is in distress, yes, one of the key indicators of that is failure to pass a budget. But if you see that it fails to collect revenue, things are in shambles, the one thing you can do is to dissolve that municipality and have an administrator take over. The Treasury never did any of that stuff. And instead, what would happen is that, and this is a pet subject of mine, is that there was this pretense of intervention, this whole absurd idea actually in the Constitution, that when a municipality fails, you must have a provincial intervention to try and sort things out. They must come up with a plan and bring an administrator. But in most cases in ANC politics, the reality is that the municipality fails because it is being messed up by local politicians in cahoots with provincial and at times with national leaders. And so, the monies that get stolen at a local level are shared with provincial leaders. And so, these provincial leaders would come in pretending that they are helping, but they are not helping. And at times they would even take forever to respond. The Makana municipality, Grahamstown, is a tragic case of a municipality that has been literally run down by ANC corruption, and the provincial government is complicit right in that. So this is a situation that was encouraged by the flourishment of patronage politics. These leaders were put in there simply because they were loyal to provincial leaders, to the president. There was no sense of merit at all. I mean, this is a degeneration of our politics, neo-patrimonial politics. So long as the local patrons, local leaders of the party, it was a network, client patron network. So long as local leaders provided support to provincial and provincial to national, they were allowed to feed off state resources. This was kind of going back to a medieval state where the ruler gets legitimacy by allowing people to feed off state resources in return for their loyalty. That's what the Jacob Zuma president turned the state into, a patron-client set of networks where merit did not matter. What mattered was that loyalty to the president, because the president had no legitimacy. So the only way he could gather legitimacy was to dish out patronage and allow those below him to do as they please. So that's what happened, really. That's what Tabo does not want to get it to go into.
Well, he places a lot of emphasis, just like his comrades, on the much talked about renewal. Let's take a listen to what he had to say around that.
You must have heard some of our leaders talking about renewal. Because in the end, certainly the last conference of the ANC 2017 said there must be renewal of the ANC. You can't have a membership like this. Because this kind of membership, this is what it is producing. The population is losing trust in the organization. The programs of the movement that are announced are not being implemented. The ANC corruption is being attacked. ANC is being identified with corruption, all as a consequence of this negative tendency in terms of the quality of the membership of the ANC, and therefore said, the conference said, therefore there must be renewal.
There must be renewal, and further from there, then on, he then went on to talk about the pledge that the councillor candidates of the ANC signed the other day, and why it was important. I want us to take both points as we round up this discussion, Prof. Let's take a listen to what he had to say around that pledge that ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa presided over the other day.
We must, as these social partners, get together and indeed produce these funds, these monies, to invest in this economy, because I'm saying, in the context of local government, if we don't do that, these resources to meet these commitments that are here, we'll build the roads, we will deal with sewage, and clean water will come, and it won't happen if we don't attend to this matter. So I think that this is, I think myself, a national matter. I think we should, all of us as South Africans, really insist to say we are going to make sure that this ANC keeps this commitment.
There you have it. Prof thinks that if indeed the ANC renews itself and these councillors stick to the pledge that they signed, business is going to come on board and invest the trillion rands that it has promised to invest, which it says is a first. It's the first time since 1994 that you've got that kind of commitment coming from business. In return, it's going to ask or expect the ANC government, all spheres, to do the right things, but not only that, to come with the 2.4 or 2.6, can't remember the exact figure now, that he said government should then bring to the table, and that should signal the beginning of new and better things to come.
I think he's saying what most of us wish would happen. Because clearly, we're in a serious situation. Revenue is low. Social demands are quite high. But what is equally important to note is that yes, even though there may be serious revenue challenges, the point is, in some instances, there is revenue. As he said, I mean, some of these municipalities can only spend about 62-68% of their capital budget, which means that they can't implement infrastructure. There's no infrastructure. Without infrastructure, you can't attract, you can't have a healthy economic activity. And this has to do with how you deploy human capital in these municipalities. I mean, just recently you had a case of Enoch Mkijima where politicians unveiled an open field pretending that it was a stadium that was built for 15 million rand. And these are the kind of municipalities that Thabo was talking about, which cannot generate their own revenue. And yet the little that they have gets wasted completely. And you wonder why the ANC would have people like that. And the fact that it happens with such ease is an indication of how widespread it possibly is, right? So this is the ANC that you're talking about, whose politicians pretty much uses the state as a source of livelihood, not to transform, not to use the resources and legislation to transform society, but to feed off the state. So given that this has been happening for years, a pledge will not change much, and the ANC has this thing that people are guided by their own conscience, one needs to accept that amongst the ANC are thieves, people who are intent on looting the state. They have no care for morality, they have no conscience. So it then becomes the responsibility of the leadership of the party to sift through, to be tight in their selection process, to make sure that they have good people. Even now, with Kgalema Motlanthe in place, seeing through the selection process, you still had problems. People being killed, others being elected in wards where they don't reside. So you still have a group of people who are determined to cheat the system so that they use the ANC as an instrument for self-enrichment. So the leadership, strong control, not just from Luthuli House, but from the various provincial houses down to the regional offices, to make sure that you have good people in place and you have clear processes, and those who violate these processes are dealt with properly. Not this thing that their conscience will guide them. I mean, just recently in Mpumalanga, you had a fellow who's just been charged of murder, right? And just after getting bail, he's out there addressing a rally and trying to spin this. And this is an ANC leader. So how do you allow people like that to go around speaking on behalf of the ANC? Why not instantly get rid of them. Be tough on these things, because on their own, they are incapable of acting morally. So the organization, based on its own rules, on its own ethical compass, must act to ensure that people act in a way that showcases the best of the ANC.
Prof, we've run out of time, but something you said just reminded me of this, that some of the people Thabo Mbeki was addressing just now, in fact, feed off that patronage system or the patronage networks of the ANC. I'm keen to have you say something on that, but also what you think was a strategy behind leaving all the officials on the campaign trail in bus terminuses and taxi ranks, and walkabouts and all of that, and then taking Thabo Mbeki, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka and Kgalema Motlanthe to address these professionals. Curious for me.
Look, yes, and some of those professionals that Zizi was speaking to are people who had been engaging with the ANC. And I mean, you had that president of South African Association of Engineers, explaining his problem with Lindiwe. Lindiwe Sisulu had promised to do this and that. Now she's gone. Then there's a new person altogether, and the person, and Sputler, who was responsible for the infrastructure program, saying that we have money but no expertise. And yet there's this association that has been wanting to work with government. And at some point I was expecting someone to say, we are surprised that, Mr. President, you are still a member of the ANC, because the ANC is capable of these extraordinarily stupid things. They say one thing but do something else completely. Of course, he remains a member of the ANC. He wants these professional business people to play ball. And he's the kind of a person, I guess, who still has a lot of credibility to speak to professional people, to business, because it was under Thabo Mbeki's ANC that the middle class and the black bourgeoisie were defined as the motive forces of the revolution, so to speak. So he has been a fan of the black bourgeoisie project and intellectual. So, other people might not play quite well in that audience because they are better at other things instead of intellectualizing. Yeah.
President Lejana, thanks very much for your time and insights this evening.
All right, William. Take care.
Because up next, some wayward ANC members today held reporters hostage and confiscated their equipment. This a day after journalists around the country commemorated apartheid-era brutality towards the media, including the burning of newspapers by the apartheid government. We'll discuss that issue in a moment. Don't go away. An SABC crew was held hostage for over 2 hours in Mpumalanga today by alleged ANC supporters who threatened to burn an SABC news vehicle and take the crew's equipment. Our colleague and reporter Mutsibi Munareng detailed what exactly happened during our sister program earlier today.
The latest is that we are still currently engaging with this group of people that I believe they're from the ANC, because they are the actors that got signed placards of the ANC, whom they claim that they are members of the community. We are also with the police here trying to find a solution to the story. In fact, in the morning, we were deployed for a service delivery story in the area called Parcels Hook, just outside Akonuk. saw earlier on, we were doing interviews with some community members, and this ANC group, they believe that we neglected talking to the ward councillor in the area. Hence, we made an appointment with the executive mayor at 1400 hours that we will be coming to their offices, doing interviews regarding the issue of lack of water around the Bushbuck Ridge area. So basically, this is what is happening. We are still negotiating with the police here, including the members of the community, so that they can release us. Yes, they threatened us that they want to burn the car and also take our equipment.
How many of you have been captured, so to speak, and how is it you're at liberty to talk to us right now?
We are three of the SABC crew, two journalists and one camera person, and all of them, they are women. I'm just a male journalist as I speak to you. And now this is a group of, I think, over 20-25 people are wearing ANC regalia, some of them. And clearly you can see that they are furious, believing that we are pushing a certain agenda. And we explained to them to say we are covering stories independently, so, and we'll be impartial. We will make sure that we balance the story. That is why we cannot talk to a ward councillor. We'll then have to talk to a political leader who is the executive mayor of the Bushbuck Ridge local municipality. But unfortunately, they don't understand. They even say that they are illiterate. They want us to delete some of the materials that we have already filmed here.
Yeah.
Our colleague Mutsebi Monareng speaking to fellow anchor Nombu Siziba about the ordeal that they went through this afternoon. Joining me now to discuss this matter and its implications is the head of news here at the SABC, Patiswa Magopeni. We're also joined by Isak Menar from the South African National Editors Forum, and we're also joined by Terry Tselane, who is, of course, you must be well versed with. He's a former commissioner of the Independent Electoral Commission, well versed in these issues, and will hopefully shed some light as to what needs to, or what happens, what are the rules during this time. 10 days to go before that November 1 election. Patiswa Magopeni, I don't know how that crew survived 2 hours of being held hostage. We were held hostage for a few seconds outside Mill Park Hospital, and we were shaken.
Good evening, viewer, and good evening to the viewers. It is correct. They were so shaken to the extent that only tomorrow they are going to go back and open a case regarding the incident, and that tomorrow we have to organize counseling services for the journalists that were out in that story. And I think what's bothering me more is the fact that this is not even a case of thugs looking for cameras and looking for things they can go and sell. In this case, it was a clear case of censorship and a clear case of trying to gatekeep the kind of coverage that we do. Because one of the things that are clear from the account that we got from the journalists is that the ward councillor was with the group. So she was part of that group, and I got to understand that it's a lady. So she was part of that group. And in fact, what we got to understand is that they wanted us to have approached the ward councillor first to get access to speak to the community. I've never heard of that, that now communities have to get clearance from ward councillors or whoever is there as a political head to be able to speak on the issues that they need to talk about. So it is worrying. And as you had said initially, is that this happens a day after the country commemorated Black Wednesday, and if this happens in an environment where journalists are supposed to be guaranteed freedom to do their work, and in a country that embraces democratic principles, and we find ourselves in this situation, it's really, really worrying. And what more worrying is the fact that these are the journalists who are deployed in that area for the period of the elections coverage, that they are going to be with those communities and doing work in those communities. And now we have to think twice about what needs to be done.
And we did invite the ANC. They've been giving us the runaround. Isak Minar, as the South African National Editors Forum, you've been engaging political parties on this matter, on these matters, as well as the Independent Electoral Commission. You are familiar with the conversations that have been going on within the party liaison committee and so on. What were the commitments made in ensuring that this atmosphere is free and fair, and such things actually never happen?
Well, the commitment is actually a legal commitment, as captured in the Electoral Code of Conduct, which is part of our legal system. And in the Code of Conduct, there's a specific clause that acknowledges the role of the media during elections, and it reads that all registered parties and candidates should respect the role of the media during elections, not prevent access by media to public events, and ensure that journalists are not harassed, intimidated, and that there is no threat or physical assault on journalists. So that's all part of our legislative framework. In addition to that there's an obligation on parties and candidates participating in the election to actually promote this code and condemn any acts that may be in contravention of the code. So we would love to hear the party leaders now to come out and condemn these acts, because that is what the code prescribes.
Terry Talane, I mean, in your past life as the commissioner with the Independent Electoral Commission, what do incidents like these do to the atmosphere that's supposed to be free and fair going into an election, and especially as this incident does, coming so close before the actual election? We have 10 days to go, before that election.
Thank you very much for having me, and good evening to your viewers. Of course, incidents like this contaminates the environment for free and fair elections. And as Isaac correctly pointed out, Section 99 of the Electoral Act creates or establishes a code of conduct to which all the political parties and candidates participating in the elections bind themselves. So it is incumbent upon the political parties and leaders and candidates to ensure that their members comply with the provisions of the code of conduct. And then if they do not comply with those provisions, Isaac has already indicated what those provisions are. That firstly, that all the political parties, leaders and members must respect the role of media before, during and after the elections. And secondly, that they must ensure free access of media to cover the events for the elections. And lastly, that they've got to ensure that there is no intimidation of those who are covering the elections. So it is an important factor. And of course, as I've indicated, violation of that or non-adherence to the provisions of the Code of Conduct contaminates the environment within which the elections are supposed to be taking place.
Apart from playing a charge tomorrow, which you said is what our crew and the organization will be doing, are we going to engage the political party concerned?
We are hoping that the party is going to come out in the first place and condemn the incident.
Yes.
And from there, we should be able to have a conversation about what needs to be done.
And that was the point of inviting them.
And in fact, we have engaged in the past week with the party on the processes that are followed in the way we cover the elections and what needs to be done. And submission of schedules in advance so that we allocate our resources in time. So we have engaged with the party before, and we are hoping that there will be further engagement now. But I think, for me, one thing that unsettles me is the fact that we, in addition to promoting transparency, which is a democratic principle, and promoting access to information, promoting media freedom, and getting people to account for the things that they do, regardless of where they are and who they are, is the fact that in the main, as the media, we also have to promote human rights observance, and access to information is one of those rights. So when that right is trampled on, as we have seen in this case, bearing in mind that the SABC is a massive institution that talks to millions of citizens in the country. So it's not just the one story, it's the people who would have had access to that story that are not going to have access to that story as a result of the incident. So that's greatly worrying, because free flow of information is what we expect to be protected as the media, and particularly public service media, because we have this obligation to ensure that ahead of elections, all citizens have credible information so that they make informed decisions. When that is hindered, it becomes a huge problem. Yeah.
Isak Minar, I mean, the things that Patiswa has just spoken about obviously apply to each and every media practitioner, I mean, in the country. As much as the SABC may have a particular mandate, but the things that she was talking about apply to each and every one of us out there trying to bring the story of this election to South Africans.
Yes, of course, because it is a combined effort of all the media, whether it's public service, commercial, community media, to try and ensure that the electorate have the information that they need so that they go and vote. So as Patiswa said, I cannot emphasize it enough, it's not just an attack on the media, it's actually an attack on that will that will cause the public not to be informed about information that can assist them to exercise their democratic right. I would like to say that when an incident like this happens, we expect from the media to not only report such incidents to the police, because it's clearly a criminal act, but in terms of the Electoral Act and the Code of Conduct, it can also be taken to the Electoral Court. And in fact, the Chief Electoral Officer also has, in terms of the Act, the powers to actually intervene and make sure that such an incident be dealt with speedily. And this is an issue that SANA have raised with the IEC to try and come to some kind of agreement that the moment there is problems in terms of the code of conduct against the media, so that they cannot do what they need to do, that the IEC assists to try and resolve the issue as quickly as possible. The IEC has also conflict resolution mechanisms. So there are actually quite a number of different steps that can be taken. And the compliance with the clauses regarding the media have not been really tested in previous elections. So we really hope that this incident and some other incidents that happened over the past few weeks, that we can try and act in such a way that there's a culture that media is respected and assisted to do their work instead of obstructed to do their work.
Teretsalani, we are noting there as both Patiswa and Isak were raising all the points that they were raising. Quick last word from you.
Of course, as Isak has indicated, Section 103A of the Electoral Act empowers the Commission to deal with the violations of the Code of Conduct through conciliation. So they've got the power to bring the parties together in order to be able to deal with this. But also Section 96 of the Electoral Act empowers the Electoral Court to impose certain penalties to a party or individuals or candidates that are violating the provisions of the Code of Conduct. So it is up to the Commission, firstly, to act in terms of Section 103A of the Electoral Act, or alternatively for any person to take an issue with the Electoral Court in terms of Section 96 of the Electoral Act to make sure that there are penalties imposed against any person who is violating the provisions of the Code of Conduct.
Well, hopefully all these processes will kick in and someone is going to learn a lesson from this. Patricia Makopeni, who is the head of news here at the SABC. Isak Minar, who is a member of the South African National Editors Forum Executive, as well as Terry Tsalane, who is from the Institute of Election Management Services. Now, a clip of ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa campaigning for the party in 2019, promising people in Alex housing, has gone viral. Now the party has tried to spin the clip and provide what they call context. Well, we went into our archives to get just a little bit more. Take a listen.
Jwale re le mmuso wa South Africa, se re ahile dintlo tse dingata, re ahile dintlo tse fetang 4 million. Le hona mona re satla le ahela dintlo hona mona Alexander, ke batlo le dule le tseba ukuthi nakhona lapha e-Alexander sisazowakha izindlu ukuthi abantu bakithi bazithola izindlu. Lokho sizakwenza. Ngifuna ukwazi ukuthi nini na. Bengazi ukuthi nizawubuza lo mbuzo. Bengazi kodwa ngahamba no minister wethu we-human settlements wezindlu. Bane program, mamelani kahle. Bane program ebhekane nalo leli lonke lakithi lase-South Africa. I-program ethi sisazowakha izindlu ezilingana no-1 million. 1 million yezindlu zizowakhiwa lezo zindlu lapha e-Alexander, mamelani. Lapha e-Alexander sisazobhekisisa kahle indaba yomhlaba. Ukuthi sikwazi ukuthi masakha izindlu, siyakha izindlu ngendlela efanele. Abanye benu baye bahanjiswa bayiswa e-Deep Slot. Abanye banikwe bayiswa kwezinye indawo. Yonke leyo nto sizoyibhekisisa kahle ukuthi nikwazi ukuthola izindlu. So if building of houses is going to continue, because we know that as our people you are in great need, you need service delivery, and you need houses as well.
You heard him yourselves. And that was this evening's edition of The Watchdog. Do join us again tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock sharp. Good night.